warm welcome from the People's Dispatch studios in New Delhi. I'm Siddhantani and you're watching Daily Debrief, your primer on some of the top international news stories of the day. Today we're talking about COP26, we're talking about Sudan, Tunisia, and of course we're looking at a conversation that is happening among Catholic bishops in the United States. First up, 2 weeks of intense negotiations on reducing the global rate of climate change came to a dramatic end in Glasgow. And it boiled down to semantics and targets which many feel are not good enough to meet the challenges of global warming. I apologize for the way this process has unfolded and I am deeply sorry, said Alok Sharma, the president of this summit, from the stage close to tears. I also understand the deep disappointment, but as you have already noted, it's also vital that we protect the package, end quote. Many countries said that they are not happy with the final deal but gave in for the sake of compromise. Incidentally, India is being portrayed by large sections of the Western media for the language on coal use. NewsClick's editor-in-chief Prabir Purkayastha is in the house to give us a sense of the politics behind all of these semantics. Prabir, perhaps a weaker than expected deal. What do you make of it?
Well, the problem with the climate change negotiations is that in Paris, we did away with any commitment that countries have to take on what their targets are.
Right.
Instead, we said voluntary cuts. Now, when you sum up all the voluntary cuts, then you don't get what you need. And that's been the problem with the climate change negotiations.
Right.
Even in this, there's a lot of talk about this semantics not being included, that semantics should not have been softened and so on. But the real issues that everybody knows, we need to cut and make deep cut in emissions in order to fulfill the 1.5 degree target or a target well below 2 degrees, which was the Paris Agreement's wording.
Basic, yeah.
So if we look at that these semantics that we are talking about is not the issue. The issue is what are the commitments people are making towards the deep cuts that are required. And primarily, if deep cuts are required, then also we need to take into consideration there are a huge number of countries, particularly in Africa as well as in Asia, which do not by any means have reached a level of what would be called a minimum income, poverty alleviation or poverty elimination, which is also concomitant of what we have to do.
Absolutely.
And that's really an issue of energy. How do you fulfill people's energy needs, particularly the sections which are still poor and the poorer countries therefore, and yet meet the carbon emission target? This is really the challenge. And on that, one part of the issue, which is how much the developed countries would commit to the countries which are still, in terms of energy usage, very low on the ladder. That commitments, it is not only not being discussed, it has been postponed till next year. So effectively, you're dealing two essential parts of the same process. And then we are asking for commitments to make cuts, but we're not talking about the money that is required to be given, at least to large number of countries in Africa particularly, where they still have not started the basic minimum requirements that are there for countries to eliminate poverty.
Right.
These are the places where the poverty is the highest, and you will find also the energy requirements that are there are not being met. And if we close for them the fossil path, which is the cheaper energy use, you get concentrated energy.
Right.
Okay, that is what coal, that is what oil, that's what gas is. And we know that Africa has both gas as well as hydrocarbons, oil and it has coal as well as hydrocarbons, gas and oil. So if you close that out for them, then of course you have a huge problem. So if you're not willing to fund that, that is the key issue. Of course, India has put its neck over there by talking about phasing out of coal. But let's park that for the time being. The essential issue is that to recognize that the people are not demanding a right to emit. People are demanding a right to energy. And if finances are not made available to countries which don't have that kind of resources, then of course they have a problem of foregoing their cheapest immediate energy source, which they have, and then going into what would be relatively more expensive solutions.
Right.
Of course, it is true that renewables have dropped in price, and that's what makes it attractive. But nevertheless, let's face it, megawatt for megawatt, they have dropped in price. But kilowatt for kilowatt, in terms of kilowatt hour energy, has it dropped similarly in price? Not so. because what happens is, of course, that it is cheap to produce electricity out of wind, but you get it much less. And it is also not frequent. So when you don't get wind, what do? You have to store it. And if you store it, if you go for batteries, then that's very expensive. So you have to look at the whole cycle for a grid, for example, to understand these issues. And that needs not a simple issue of how to reduce emissions, but how to also provide energy. And that is why the demand repeatedly for finances.
Absolutely. And you've drawn that clear link, Prabir, for us. Between the financial aspect of it and financial aid aspect of it that's required for the global south as such. But a little more on India's sort of stance on this, particularly the coal issue and why that was such a sticking point.
Let me sort of say that this is not that we need money, that developing countries need money from the rich countries as a handout. The question is, there is a certain carbon resource that we have as a budget. That's what's called the global carbon budget. Already countries, and this is not something which is very ancient. 1950 onwards, you take the emissions, then the carbon budget has been expended by the developed countries, which is really Europe as well as North America. These have exhausted not only their carbon budget, they have taken lion's share of the carbon budget that people have, or what we call the carbon space that people had for emitting greenhouse gases. Having taken that, now they're still very slow in their transition. But what they're not willing to therefore do is what would be called simple equity. I have taken your space, okay, I let your transition be make it more easy by funding it. So that was really the demand that was coming from the poorer countries. India is in a unique position because unfortunately India claims to be a developed country almost. And if you look at the rhetoric of the Prime Minister and his aides, then we talk about a $5 trillion economy which we are going to soon reach. Having made all those claims, it's difficult for us to come with a bowl in our hands and say we need money. So you can articulate other people's demands, but you really can't probably get much of environmental financing as you would like to claim. But leaving that aside, the question is, if you take Europe and the United States, they can say they have gone off coal because Europe, in any case, does not have much more of coal left. They have exhausted most of their coal mines. England and Germany were the only two ones. So if you have to import coal today, it's much easier for them to import gas and oil, which is what they're doing, LNG and oil, which is why they're making the transition to, they're not talking about oil over there or gas. They're really talking about only coal. So you can see the transition to, they have said in midterm the transition will be through oil and gas, really gas. And that's what they're really now trying to do. And the United States has, for fracking, they have also gas. So given that, their focus seems to be more on coal. And in that, India and China are the largest coal users today. And therefore, they were the targets. So it became, India kind of acted as a lightning rod because China didn't put itself forward, India had to. Because we already have a large renewable program. But if we have to meet the energy needs of the country, we have another 60,000 megawatts to be put into the grid by 2030. That's the plan that was there. The Prime Minister has said no further coal, which means it seems that only about 37,000 or 35,000 gigawatts, 37,000 megawatts, 37,000 megawatts, which are already in the pipeline. That means the installations have already started. That's the only thing we will do. Therefore, scaling back, phasing out or phasing down, to me, are semantics. So I don't think that's a big issue. But I think it is also to divert the attention of the climate change negotiations, which are not being met for financial reasons, other reasons, and focusing on the word coal, phasing out as opposed to phasing down, in order to distract from the major issues that are there. And I think the major issues are, of course, the need to cut emissions, including coal as well as other fossil fuels, but also provide for the countries that are poor the ability to do so by reparations of the extra space, carbon space that developed countries have already taken up.
Absolutely. So it's pretty much a movement then for equity and justice as much as it is in these terms. Thanks for that, Prabir, and it's always good to have you on the show. Right. So, like Prabir was saying, there as much an issue of equity and justice as it's one of tackling the technical or the energy aspects of things. But we're moving on now to Sudan, where reports indicate that at least 6 pro-democracy protesters were killed when security forces fired live ammo and tear gas as demonstrations against, protests against the military takeover intensified in that country. The killings on Saturday took place in Khartoum and its twin city Omdurman, and the dead included 5 killed by gunshots and 1 who died due to suffocation from tear gas, according to the Sudan Doctors Committee. Reports also indicate that El Musalmi El Kabashi, Al Jazeera's bureau chief in Sudan, was taken into custody after security forces raided his home. Prashant is on the show now. Prashant, what's the latest from Sudan?
Right, Siddhant. So like you said, the toll seems to have increased to 7 as of now, and at least 2 of them may have been minors, according to the doctors you've been talking about. So the important thing to note, of course, is that there have been mass protests over the weekend once again in Sudan. There's been this cycle of protests following the military coup on October 25th. And it's also significant to note the fact that it's a variety of sections. So it's not only the more radical sections who are behind the earlier protests, but also centrist sections which are part of the earlier civilian government, who have been protesting on the streets. So there have been regular calls for what are called March of the Millions, tens of thousands of protesters definitely coming on the streets in big cities such as Khartoum, if not more. And the slogans are very clear that they are unhappy. They do not accept in any sense the military regime that has basically assumed de facto position in Sudan since the coup. Now, the military is, of course, trying to sort of broad base it, bring in more people together, etc., etc. But the slogan on the streets, so to speak, is very clear. It calls for continuous resistance. It calls for neighborhood blockades. So there have been a lot of cases of a lot of this struggle has happened in the neighborhood blockades because of the repression involved, where in the main spaces people are often not allowed to gather, or they're blocked on the way. So there have been a lot of, say, barricades being set up at neighborhoods. People protesting, when the security forces come, they leave the barricades and set up barricades somewhere else. So in some senses, the nature of the protest might be a bit difficult to quantify, because the fact that it's also happening in a decentralized, continuous kind of way, with occasional big marches which kind of show the protesters' strength. So clearly quite a battle between the vast variety of Sudan's civilian sections and the military-led regime that's happening over here. And I think it's important to note that what the protesters are concerned about, what the slogans seem to indicate, is they're very concerned about the fact that this coup be not taken as one of those established coups where it generally kind of happens. Somebody takes over, the new media talks about it for 2 days, and then, it's understood that new military general is the ruler, so to speak. Whereas this is clearly a case of continuing protest. It's not complete yet, and I think that's the important thing to note. So it's still maybe too early to write off the civilian sections who are protesting in Sudan, because in the past we've seen a history of these sections actually being able to bring about sustained change, despite the fact that the odds were against them. So we have previous examples in history, the December Revolution of 2018, which began in December 2018, and then it went on and on. In the beginning, everyone thought it was just a series of protests, but it escalated. Finally, they were able to overthrow Omar al-Bashir, a long-time, decades-long ruling dictator. Then, of course, there were another series. It was that wave of protests which actually forced the regime to form what is called the transitional government, which was overthrown in October 25th. So all that was actually a testament to the strength of the crowds, the strength of the fact that there is still a diverse political resistance remaining in Sudan. So I would think it's a bit too early to write off these protests. The disadvantage they face, of course, is that their opponents, that is the military, it's a very institutionalized, setup over there, military with ties to a lot of countries, which has clear interests, which, for instance, countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Israel, they have clear interests in the military, so they have external support. So while from the West there have been the usual statements of democracy, transition back to return to democracy, etc., etc., nonetheless the fact remains that there is no incentive really for countries in the West to do anything more. I mean, I'm not talking about war or anything, but but even in terms of any serious kind of penalties on the military coup establishment, there is no incentive really, because many of its allies have very close ties with them. Like we discussed in the previous episode, Israel, for instance, is clearly very happy with the coup, because it brings to more power the sections with whom Sudan signed the Abraham Accord. Right? So they're happy with the coup, and probably some of the other powers as well. So while there are multiple factors at play, a lot of it will really depend on how long the mobilizations continue, what is the kind of strength they can really summon, and keep continuing applying pressure on this, and the fact that the inherent weakness of the military at some point will have to be exposed.
Right. So perhaps taking a sort of leaf from some of those messages that are coming into Sudan, the army chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan has issued a decree, I guess, announcing the creation of a 14-member sovereign council with himself as the head. What do you make of this and the wider political scenario?
So what Burhan has done is basically consolidate his power. So I would not agree with the fact that he's, I think they're very clear they don't want to listen to the protests because the protests have only one main demand, which is the military has to withdraw. It has to go back. And for the military right now, which not only controls political power, but also actually a huge amount of economic power in Sudan, this is not a situation they can give up a bit of power. Once they give up a bit, then they lose all of it. So the Sovereignty Council that Burhan has formed is basically a rubber stamp body. Let's be very clear about it. For instance, none of the members of the old Sovereignty Council except one person are there. Some of the leaders of the tribal militias with whom the military struck deals over the past years are there. So they have retained their power. But a lot of the civilian sections have been completely ousted. So we talked about in a previous episode how the military was having discussions with the former Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok about kind of Hamdok sort of coming back to helm power. They do not seem to have worked out. So Hamdok was a representative of what is called the Forces for Freedom and Change. So let's understand that as the centrist element of the political spectrum. So the Forces of Freedom and Change had actually struck a deal with the military and they were part of the government. But even they are unhappy with, and they are not willing to accept the discussions that they have had with the military, which means they were probably offered too less. And even they could not arrive at a compromise with the military. So you can guess that the more radical sections are even more unhappy. So we can probably see that across the political spectrum, stretching from the Forces of Freedom of Left on the one hand, to trade unions, the Sudanese Professionals Association, Sudanese Communist Party, the resistance committees in the neighborhoods, which are actually the backbone of a lot of these protests. So across the spectrum, there is an opposition to what the military has done. So the Sovereignty Council is basically a bit of a, like I said, it's a bit of an eyewash to sort of give the impression of civilian participation or inclusive government. But I think it's pretty clear that it's only those sections which do not have too much credit among the people, which do not have actually, for that matter, too much bargaining power or political power either, who have been included as some kind of a front for the military to continue its rule. Also important to note that one of the key members of the Sovereignty Council continues to be the General Dagalo, who's also known as Hemeti, the head of this notorious paramilitary force called the Rapid Support Forces. They were responsible for a lot of human rights violations in Sudan, in Darfur in the past, and he continues to be in the council, retain his power. And he's one of the people who the popular organizations would like prosecuted for various crimes. So the fact that he has continued to remain in power shows that this is very clearly a military enterprise. Military continues to be very well entrenched in Sudan as of now. So I'm not looking for too much, concessions from the military, so to speak. What the military might try to do is maybe again raise some kind of a civilian figurehead. And like we discussed before, there'll always be the idea of bringing technocrats to power, which means you bring somebody who's, for the namesake, a civilian, but who is in no way to really influence policies. So who kind of acts as a figurehead, and also a convenient person to blame when there's a problem.
Things don't go the way
So that's really probably what the military strategy is going to be, and a lot right now depends on, for instance, Sudan's neighbors, how much they're willing to provide that kind of essential support. The fact that interested foreign players do not give you more support to the military government and then make things more difficult for the people. But ultimately it boils down to the fact about whether those resistance and protests can be sustained, because the military does not have, it has power, but it does not have popular credibility per se. So unlike the next coup we're going to talk about, the military does not have so much popular credibility. So all it takes is maybe one mistake or two mistakes, and then you could see a mass uprising again, which might push people back on the streets. We saw that happen in Egypt 10 years ago. We saw that happen in Tunisia. We saw that happen in Sudan as well. So overall, I would say still a bit too early to judge. It's an important place to keep watching, because Sudan has a huge strategic importance in the region. Also nearby Ethiopia is going through its own crisis. Egypt has a very insidious role to play in many of these places. So overall, right now the region is really on the boil, and Sudan is one of the key fronts.
That's, of course, something that we will keep looking at. Thanks for that, Prashant. We're moving on to, like Prashant mentioned, the next coup, where thousands in Tunisia have marched near parliament in the capital city of Tunis against President Kais Saied's seizure of political power. Hundreds of police were deployed in the capital's Bardo Palace in an attempt to prevent demonstrators from reaching Parliament building. Shut down Kais Saied and freedom, freedom, end the police state were the chants as protesters pulled down barricades on the way to Parliament. Prashant, what's the latest from Tunisia, and clearly, like you mentioned, on the boil?
Right. Again, slightly different situation, because I think the nature of the opposition is far more fractured in Tunisia. So Kais Saied, like we talked about before, assumed power first in July. It was a partial power grab. He suspended parliament, took away the immunity. Later again, he enacted a fresh series of rules which gave him even more power. He basically declared that certain sections of the constitution need not apply to what he was doing.
Right.
Then he appointed his own government with a prime minister, again, who was a technocrat. And he continues to basically control the country pretty much, so to speak. Now, one important issue to note here is that the opposition to Kais Saied's regime is, like I said, not only fractured, but at least some sections have very little credibility among the people as well. So you have the Ennahda party, which is the Islamist party, which has had a very bad record in terms of governance. It's suffering a huge amount of internal dissension because people are not convinced, or even their own members are not convinced of the party leadership's ability to tackle the situation.
Right.
So we've had important leaders of the party resigning in
Mass resignations.
mass resignations taking place. We've had, say, some of the other parties, either who are Islamist or more liberal for that matter, all going through first of all, going through a crisis in terms of not knowing how much to support what the president did, or not knowing how much of an adversarial stand to take, but also the fact that all of them lacking pretty much in credibility. Right. And this stems, this also boils down to the fact, an issue we talked about often on this show, which is that many countries like Tunisia, which face a multiple front crisis, we see that there is a massive economic crisis going on. We see that the only solution that governments have to answer in such a situation is more austerity policies. Right. They cut funds because they don't have money. Yeah. So they cut funds, they cut budgets, they cut public spending, social welfare, all that is cut. They're not able to offer jobs. And so there is this rising a sentiment among the youth, especially many of whom are educated but who are not getting the jobs they deserve. Yeah. There's discontent. There is, because of austerity policies, again, we see that various institutions are badly hit. So we have the education system, we have the health system, all of which get crippled over time. And then what happens is, when you have a crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic, country after country faced the crisis we're talking about, which is that in the absence of being able to mobilize those the kind of money needed to handle the crisis, how could a public health system deal with it? They couldn't. So Tunisia, for instance, went through a very bad bout of COVID-19, and that the handling of the crisis was very, very heavily criticized. So, for instance, the countries in the global north, or the Western countries, or the developed countries, are able to mobilize the kind of money to throw it to emergency funding of their services. Right. So, what can Lebanon do, or what can Tunisia do? So, they have no options but to really try to get funds from global agencies. So, it's at this point that you have the rise of, say, this person who comes from outside, who doesn't seem to be part of this messy political system, and that's exactly what President Kais Saied is. And we have had leaders like that emerge in various parts of the world, some of them right-wing populists, some of them authoritarian, some of them more authoritarian than the others. So Kais Saied has been somewhere in the middle. He's arrested a lot of critics of the government, of course, opposition leaders, journalists, many of them already in prison. Right. It is likely that in the coming months this repression may increase. There may not be an official emergency or anything of that sort, but rivals of the president, critics of including one former president, has also been facing a case. So many of them may not be arrested, or they may be arrested, they may face cases. Similar thing happening in Algeria as well, with the president Abdelmadjid Tebboune. Many critics of his have been put in jail or charged with various crimes, even as he claims that he's supporting people's movements. Right. So that's really the question, what Kais Saied is going to do. The fact, of course, is that he also has some popular support, it has to be said. The fact that there are a lot of people across Tunisia who somehow feel that, like I said, for the reasons mentioned, that he can solve the problems of the country. But the truth really is that he does not have the tools, or for that matter, no leader would really have the tools. So it's not that by suspending democracy or by suspending the messiness of participatory governance, you are actually able to solve the crisis of the country
that the people are facing.
Exactly. So I think that's a broader context in which to look at these politics. So challenging times ahead for Tunisia as well, especially because the big question is, will Kais Saied's policies take an even more authoritarian turn? So will there be more repression? Will there be more arrests of critics? Will there be more cases filed against people who are speaking out? And unlike, say, for instance, Sudan, where it was an open coup, these kind of constitutional coups, so to speak, are sometimes often as dangerous as well. So important to sort of keep that place.
Absolutely. And we're moving on finally to the United States, where Roman Catholic bishops this week are expected to revisit whether President Joe Biden's support for abortion rights should disqualify him from receiving communion. It's an issue that has deepened rifts in the church since Biden took office. At a conference that begins today in the city of Baltimore, the bishops are scheduled to vote on a document clarifying the meaning of Holy Communion, a sacrament central to the Catholic faith. A committee drafted the document after the bishops' June conference, where they debated whether to take a position on the eligibility of prominent Catholics such as Biden to receive communion. In the opinion of some of these bishops, Biden's political actions contradict church teachings. Prashant, it seems a bit like anyone who assumes the Oval Office would be in contradiction to any decent human faith.
Well, I mean, that's another way of looking at it entirely. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to be a US president without being in violation of most norms of decency, like you said. On this issue, however, I'm going to take the other side.
Absolute other side, yeah.
Funnily enough, Biden recently visited a pope who apparently told him that he was a good Catholic. So that Biden has a pope on his side. But this is a bit of a worrying, tendency, so to speak, because the domain of religion should not really be to sort of declare, I would think, at least to declare, make these kind of decisions, because what then happens is that this is a political decision as much as it is couched in theological terms. As much as the document might be about theology, this is nonetheless a political decision, because a decision like this automatically means that there is always some section of the voter base which is influenced by it. A decision like this always means that you're giving opponents of a particular politician more ammunition to attack that position. Important to note, of course, that abortion now is there is only, I think, 20 or 25% of American people
women,
who support overturning the abortion law currently in place, which itself is a relatively strict law. It's not like the against abortions. So it's not an open law which permits all kinds of abortions. It still has restrictions. And even that law, people are slightly unhappy about it being withdrawn, because then it becomes very difficult and it actually causes risk to life when there are no proper abortion facilities. And countries have been recognizing this around the world, because even Catholic countries, countries across religions are increasingly permitting abortions, because the medical science behind it is so solid. One, the impact of it being criminalized is horribly dangerous to women across the spectrum, but especially those from the underprivileged and poor sections. And the fact that an underground setup for this exists is actually a very dangerous thing.
Absolutely.
So when something like this happens, a really difficult, in many ways, a really problematic intrusion or intervention as far as a religious body is concerned, because I think while everyone might have their personal choice of religion, it's important for religious institutions to stay away from their acts being directly having an impact on political culture. Unfortunately, that is not the way the world works, but hey, a journalist can dream.
Yeah, indeed. And with that dream, we'll do it. That'll do it for us today. From Prashant and me and the entire People's Dispatch team, you've been watching Daily Debrief. We'll be back again, same time, same place tomorrow. Until then, for more on all these stories, you can visit our website, peoplesdispatch.org, and follow us on all the regular social media channels. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.